Okay, good afternoon. You're very welcome to this latest webinar in the series on Engineers Ireland accreditation processes. We've previously looked at the accreditation criteria. Today's webinar, we're going to look at the accreditation procedure itself. We have three speakers. There's myself, Damien Owens, Registrar, followed by Dr. Richard Manton, Deputy Registrar Engineers Ireland, and Dr. Noel from BCU. And we'll all give a different perspective on the new accreditation procedure recently revised and updated at Engineers Ireland. Just to let you know, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button in the tab on the screen. Do not use the chat. You've used the Q&A, please. And bear in mind that this webinar is being recorded. However, we will stop the recording for the Q&A session at the end. So each of the speakers is going to take about 12 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have an open Q&A discussion. So the accreditation criteria has been updated for 2021. It reflects many changes on the previous accreditation criteria to reflect mobility through records, the range of engineering programs that are accredited level 6 to level 9, outcomes-based approach to accreditation, and it also looks at the review process. So in terms of accredited programs, Engineers Ireland has been an accredited engineering program since 1982, and this is a profile of the existing base of accredited programs. So as you can see, there's quite a broad spectrum: electrical, electronic, civil, mechanical, manufacturing, and biomedical. And they are in turn are stratified according to the various international accords to which we're a party to, and also the various professional engineering titles within Engineers Ireland and against the NFQ levels. So it's quite a broad range of activity and has gone on for quite a number of years. From a global perspective, Engineers Ireland is party to a number of international agreements, and our accreditation criteria reflect a lot of the graduate attributes and requirements from those agreements. And so the key point there is that, just as we're going to talk about the Engineers Ireland assessment procedure, Engineers Ireland is in turn assessed and our processes are reviewed by our international peers. So if we turn up at your HEI for an accreditation visit, and we in turn have our international assessors with us, you'll see that they will be assessing us, assessing you. So the core documents, we have the accreditation criteria, which I said were updated in January, and that's supported then by the procedure for accreditation, which is the subject matter that we're going to speak about today. So the accreditation criteria set out what the HEI must impart to students, what learning outcomes the students must learn, and how that is delivered. The accreditation procedure, on the other hand, sets out for the HEIs how to demonstrate what evidence, and this is a key point, and I'll keep coming back to again and again, is the evidence is what has been achieved by students and how it's supported. And the key thing here is that the HEI should gather evidence along the student journey through the programme. In terms of the key focus, Engineers Ireland is not overly concerned with, say, entry standards or duration, pedagogical methods, whether it's the programme is delivered physically or online. We're not concerned with those. What we are concerned with is demonstrating evidence of what students have actually achieved, and that the processes, the assessment processes are impartial and robust and stand up to scrutiny. And that it is an engineering programme, so there should be a balance of both theory and practical work throughout the programme, and a consistent quality assurance mechanism across the School of Engineering, but also across the entire HEI. So the main updates on accreditation procedure from the previous version: there's clear delineation of roles and who does what, and we provided updated guidance on what evidence to be provided, supported by a number of checklists. We're gradually moving towards a single assessment event for HEIs. So this is trying to make sure that all the programs within a single HEI are assessed at the same time, and they're all aligned. And this makes the assessment process as much more rewarding for the HEI and cuts down a lot of repetition of effort than having assessments every year. It also looks at the incorporation of online evidence and the visit being a hybrid between a physical visit and an online visit. And that's covered in the next presentation by Dr. Richard Manton. So the procedure overview, it has a number of distinct headings, which we look at in a little bit more detail. The first one is the self-assessment document. So this is where the HEI sets out the raison d'etre for the program, how it's delivered, and what is designed for the students to achieve. And Engineers Ireland requires that this document is submitted about 6 weeks prior to the visit. And the document itself follows the headings that are set out in the procedure, such as the program viability, the professional title that the program is designed to achieve. So follow the document headings in the procedure. There's normally one document per program under review. However, if there's a nested program, for example, a level 6 program with level 6 nested in there, they can be incorporated into one document. The document should set out clearly the background as how the program objectives are achieved. That's the key part of the document, how the students are achieving the program objectives, how they are then set against the various course modules to deliver those. And a very important point is that we should close the loop on any recommendations from previous visits and any quality assurance reviews. And this is a key point of the accreditation process, is getting closure on what has happened from the previous visit. It doesn't necessarily mean that the HEI has to have accepted the recommendations in the previous visit, but at least let us know you've considered them and what actions have been taken accordingly or not. Once the document is being received, especially in a timely fashion, it allows for the formation of a review team. And the review team comprises 2 academics and somebody from industry. But in particular, if the program is niche, we may have to get specialists from overseas. So it's very important that we get the documentation and the material well in advance. It also allows the panel to consider the document and give feedback to the HEI. And in some cases, that feedback may require that the visit is delayed until more information is provided. So it cuts down any, I suppose, wastage of resources and time, because it is a time-consuming process. And it also identifies any additional areas of interest that the panel wants to, I suppose, progress to investigate further. It also provides clarification on the evidence sought by the review team. So again, the review team will say, well, actually, we need more evidence in particular areas, and then a decision to go or not on the visit is made. The next stage is the evidence review, and this will be covered in the later presentation. But so the panel's initial assessment of the evidence and report is looked at. And then a key part of the evidence review is understanding the competition of what we colloquially call the heat map. And that's a mapping of to what extent program modules address the various program outcomes. And it's very important to, I suppose, for the panel to understand how those figures are arrived at, because naturally, every program is different, every program team is different, and people will have their own natural, I suppose, feeling for, well, this contributes to a 4 in program outcome 1, or it's low, it's level 1. The last thing we want to see is every program outcome being hit in every module. That's simply, the alarm bells go off when we see that. It simply cannot happen in practice. We also, other areas that we pay particular attention to is the marking schemes, both for exams, but also in particular for projects. How are projects marked, and what guidance is given to students for their project work? And the other areas then that we look at is the numbers of employers and graduates and students that we need for interviews. And that will largely reflect the number of programs that are there. Again, if this nested program, this is level 6, we're in embedded level 7, we would want to see graduates from both those programs. Coming on to the assessment visit itself, the 2015 procedure is there on the left-hand side and the blended procedure on the right. And in essence, what has happened when the online environment is that on the on-site visits, the first afternoon is usually spent with the evidence room and doing interviews. So there's a good 4.5 hours spent on that work. And in the online environment, a lot of that evidence is now available remotely, and the panel can look at that before any on-site visit. And so basically a portion of the visit can move online, and it's overall it's the same effort required, and it's the same, I suppose, duration of work by the panel, but it's just distributed differently across the 2 days. Again, in the red print there on the right hand side, the purpose of the visit is to look at evidence. That's the key point. The other aspects of the schedule is that it's quite flexible, and it can be changed on the hoof as we go along, depending on what evidence is there or not there. And just a key reminder that all discussions during the accreditation process, including the final meetings, they are all confidential. Similarly, it goes for the interviews with students, graduates, employers. Anything that is said and any feedback given is anonymized, is totally confidential. After the visit then, the panel, may still be waiting to receive any outstanding material from the HEI following on from questions from the visit itself. And in time then the panel reviews its own draft report of its findings and recommendation to the Accreditation Board. This is sent then to the HEI for factual checking. And once that's received back, the report and recommendation are discussed at a meeting of the Engineers Ireland Accreditation Board. And if approved, then the final report is then sent back to the HEI, and we publish the outcome on our own website and also on some international websites also. And in more recent times, we've gone back to do presentation of accreditation certificates. So we would like to do that with the HEI and perhaps at the local engineers region and make an event, because it's a recognition of the good work of the staff in the HEI and also of the students. So in quick conclusions, key points from the report is when you're completing it, close the loop on the previous visit. It's a key point. Let us know how you've closed off any recommendations or conditions from the previous visit. Cleared evidence. Most of the material is now online and should be captured, but make sure it's provided in context. We don't want just to drag and drop a file server for us to have to do Sherlock Holmes and find our way through it. And then on quality assurance, provide any evidence of any external QA reviews, programmatic reviews, and this reduces duplication. It means the panel does not have to search, and if they see the recommendations from other programmatic reviews, it helps build confidence and an understanding of the program delivered at the HEI. So I'm now going to hand you over to Richard Manton, who will go on to the online hybrid process.
Thanks, Damien. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail on how we've moved our process online, with a particular focus on the online evidence review and the visit. So firstly, in terms of overview, Damien covered the self-assessment report, which I won't reiterate in any great detail. Just really to tell you that from the HEI perspective, of course, this is something that you will need to prepare. From the assessor perspective, this is something that you will need to read in detail. That is typically around 80 pages as a PDF. Of course, you'll receive that by email or with the online evidence. Typically as well, that we have asked that it's supplied 6 weeks in advance. And that one of the first things you'll need to look at is how that pairs up with our accreditation criteria document, which, as Damien said, was revised earlier this year. So that will set out the education standard, whether the program is seeking accreditation at the Chartered Engineer standard or one of our other standards. The document also goes into detail on the various sections that are prescribed, for example, related to entry standards, the structure of the program, the final year projects, and so on. And then quite importantly, there's a detailed section on the analysis and implementation of the program outcomes. That assessors should read this with great care, that the heat map that Damien mentioned can then be used as a guide to read the report, but also then act as a guide to your review of the evidence. So while with the self-assessment report, there isn't a major change from our previous process, other than that we have really refined the sections that are prescribed. However, there is quite a change in terms of the provision of online evidence. Whereas previously we would have visited a HEI and it would have been spread over evidence rooms on the first and second day, our new procedure prescribes online evidence, which is shared along with the self-assessment report. So again, that would be in the region of 6 weeks before the visit. This then would include some of what you would have typically had in the boxes at a physical visit, but we're asking that that is organized in a way that enables, I think, a more thorough review and that review would be completed in advance of the visit. So that would include an index that, for example, you could use a shared Excel file, and that can be structured around the heat map. And I'll give you a look at a sample template that we've prepared. The evidence then, quite importantly, should include a descriptor of the module, the exam paper, solutions, student samples, the continuous assessment brief and student samples of that, project reports and mark sheets. Again, those are laid out in a checklist in the procedure document. And then there are other things that we look for in terms of the description of facilities. Perhaps that could be supplied in video form, as well as the profile of staff, external examiner reports, and program management and QA material. The visit, I'll take you through in a little bit more detail in a second, but just for now to note that this does include the same elements as the traditional visit, but that we've structured it in such a way that it can be done online, particularly during these COVID times, or on site as we hope to in the near future. But it does include those core elements that would have been well established, for example, our engagements with staff, students, graduates, employers, as well as then the presentation of initial findings. And then finally, as an assessor, what we would be looking from you is an accreditation report, where that traditionally was done in a PDF template. We've prepared a new online shared Word document, which I do think makes it easier to collaborate on the completion of the report and then to submit it to the accreditation board. And I'll give you a quick look at that template. Just a note to say that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website, as well as being emailed along with the slides to all attendees. That we did hold one previous webinar, which gave more of a HEI perspective on the compilation of the online evidence. And we were very glad to have Catherine Deegan from TU Dublin, who had very recently experienced this process themselves. So I would encourage you to check out that ethics webinar where you see this. I'll just pick out some of the main points that Catherine raised that are quite relevant for this webinar here today. One being that there is quite a lot of advanced planning required here, whereas in the past, HEIs would have had that time in advance of the visit between the submission of the self-assessment report and the visit date to gather evidence, to put into boxes, lay out the evidence room and so on. We would really emphasize that this procedure is based on the provision of online evidence along with the self-assessment report. Importantly, that gives the assessors then time to review the evidence so that when we get to the visit, they should be well prepared, well versed in terms of challenging or asking any questions of the program team. As well, another point Catherine made, which I think has been borne out in our visits, is that there may be a tendency to include everything as evidence. But really what we need here is a structured approach using an index where it's easy for the assessors. Their time shouldn't be spent trying to navigate through evidence, but it should be in terms of reading, in terms of reflecting on it and so on. And then finally, on the tour of facilities, I have a note on that, just that we would like to get back to a physical tour, but there are different ways that you can do this. For example, there would be some promotional footage that you may have of your campus, or there may be photos of labs and so on. From the assessor perspective, that the online evidence, the system that we've been using, I think is relatively similar to what many HEIs use for external examiners. So either through OneDrive or through Teams, and that they're reasonably similar systems. That you should receive an email from the HEI that you've been given access to their server, and that the evidence is retained on the HEI server. And of course, what we do, there are notes on data protection in the procedure document. But just you may need to check your junk folder for this. and ultimately it will give you access to this file sharing system. That again, the procedure document goes into more detail of how this can be structured, and very happy to discuss any if there are any questions. But ultimately we look for a folder for each module that would be structured by year to build up the program. And importantly then in that you would include your self-assessment report and this Excel-based index. Excel has worked well for us, although there may be other formats that work. But the most important thing here is that this is based on the heat map that Damien mentioned. So what we want to see are what are the strong contributor modules to each of the program outcomes, then what are the key parts of evidence, so that as an assessor you can log into this system, having read the self-assessment report, that then you can quickly navigate between what are the pieces of evidence. So for example, if the HEI is claiming that Maths 101 is a strong contributor to program outcome 1, you can then see what evidence is being provided and then click through a hyperlink to immediately see the exam papers, the continuous assessment, and so on. Moving then to the visit, as I mentioned during COVID, and I would really like to thank all the HEIs and the assessors that have engaged with us during this time. We, I think, evolved. I think we learned some lessons along the way. And ultimately, I think we have achieved what works quite well as a procedure for an online visit. That said, we would, I think, all like to be meeting people in person, getting to tour campuses in person, and hopefully that will be possible in the not too distant future. But for now, what we've crafted the visit so to allow it to be conducted online, which will be for much, if not all of this year, but then that we can move this on site. The important thing to note is that it's completed over one day, perhaps 9 to 5, maybe a little bit longer if it includes a tour of facilities and so on, but that it can be completed in one day, but on the basis that our assessors have put in the time in terms of reviewing the online evidence in advance. That time in advance may also include a preliminary meeting of the panel, or if there are any issues, for example, deficiencies with the evidence, that those can be picked up in advance. That would allow then what we hope quite an efficient visit to be completed in one day, along with then we would hope a dinner as well for that important social aspect. The key features of the visit, many will be familiar with these, that they are somewhat long-standing and would include the engagements with the staff, the presentation by management and so on. And on table 5 in the procedure document, you'll see we have laid out the agenda from the HEI perspective and from the assessor perspective in terms of various guidance there as well. A couple of notes on the interviews. We have found that online interviews have worked quite well. It has enabled, for example, graduates who may have moved away from the catchment area of the HEI to dial in. Likewise, there are employers who we may have found it difficult to engage. Again, they may be very busy people that can't travel to the campus. It has actually worked quite well. So we've allowed that scope there that perhaps these interviews could be completed in advance. Maybe they're even on site, but by video conference, that there is that flexibility there. But that said, we would still like to meet staff in person and do what we can in person while still making the best use of the technology and tools we have. And then a note on the tour facilities. Again, that we would really like, and I think our assessors really treasure getting to look at the facilities of the various HEIs. But in these COVID times, at least, there are different creative ways of presenting a virtual tour of facilities. Maybe that is by GoPro, maybe that's by video, maybe that's by a PowerPoint of photos and so on. And so, for example, I mentioned TU Dublin, of course, we would like to tour new facilities. So we would hope to get there, but there are tools we can use in the meantime. The accreditation report then is completed, as Damien said, very soon after the panel visit. We have created this shared online Word document to enable the assessors to be writing their report during the visit itself. I find it very handy for taking notes during the different sessions, that may be on the interviews, taking notes for reminders for later and so on. And then it can be complete in real time and you can see what your other assessors are writing. So for example, if one of your colleagues is leading questions during the interview stage, maybe another can be taking notes. Then you have that compilation. We would ask then that the report is submitted within 2 weeks. that we are on hand to assist if there's any guidance you need. But it is very, very important for our process that the reports are complete in a timely fashion so that then they can be sent to the accreditation board. So again, on that template, there is guidance in terms of the completion of the various sections, including, for example, on the program outcomes, what you should watch out for. And of course, you should refer to the accreditation criteria document in completing this. So then finally, in terms of a recap, what we do require the HEIs to submit and our assessors to review are these 3 aspects, which then the self-assessment report, the online evidence, and the visit, which may be online, or we would hope in the near future to get back on site. Those then, that's what is supplied and should inform your accreditation recommendation summarized in the accreditation report, which would then be submitted to the accreditation board. We do have a variety of guidance. Again, this is all available online, the accreditation criteria document, the procedure document, including guidance in the Appendix 2. Noel will talk a little bit more about that, and these training webinars. And then, of course, we do have people here to support you as well. Damien, myself, Lorna, that we are here if you have any questions at all about our procedure, or if you are interested in volunteering as an assessor, please feel free to drop us an email or give you a call. So thank you, and I'll now hand you over to Noel.
Richard, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this session, and thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be present with us. So Richard and Damien have given you some details of the structure, and I'm now going to speak directly to the people on the panel to give you a sense of what's involved and things to look out for. My first accreditation visit was to Waterford IT in 2005, and I've done about maybe 35 or so since that. And I have found them really interesting and very rewarding, and something that I have never regretted being involved in. You've already seen the structure with the different levels. Well, I just want to emphasize the fact that as a panel, we're involved in 3 of those levels, and all 3 are important. And in fact, I'll end up emphasizing the pre-visit work more so than even the work on the visit, because the work on the visit has its own natural dynamic. I think there'll be a little bit of discipline required to ensure that the pre-visit work is done appropriately. So I'm going to give you just some personal sense of what I have found useful to me. It'll be different for other people, but I think I have found this as a useful way of getting my head around the program and the material that's available to us, and trying to understand what we're looking at, because in every case it'll be different and people do things differently, and you have to try to understand how it's done. I say here to read a self-assessment report, but I don't typically read it linearly. I pick out the bits I want from it before I go back then and read the specific bits that I need to. So for example, it's really important to identify the key organizational units that contribute to the program, and the key personnel, the program chair, the course director, or the head of school. You're going to need those people on speed dial through your preparations and the visit, because you will have questions for them, and you need to know exactly who you're going to talk to and why. And again, in each institution it's different. Sometimes the professor is in charge of the program, sometimes it's the head of school, sometimes it's a program director. And also, when you're reading the program, and this depends on the context, but we've been through modularization and semesterization during the 90s and into the 90s, and programs will continue to be updated and upgraded and changed. And so you have to be really clear what you're looking at in terms of the program description. Is it a backward-facing program description that you'll find is compatible with the evidence? Or is it a forward-facing one that's telling you where things are going, but is often not compatible with the evidence? So watch out for that, and you may actually need more than one. it's important to get and read the previous accreditation report for programs that have been previously accredited. Conditions will have been managed before your visit, but glance over them to see what the issues were, because sometimes they're fixed, but then they sort of bubble up again maybe a couple of years later, and that's just when you arrive. So watch out for that. But as I think either Damien or Richard said, how the programme team has treated the recommendations will be illuminating. The recommendations are not required to be implemented, but you want to understand their thinking, and they're actually expected to explain their thinking in the self-assessment report. Also get and read the external examiners reports for at least the previous 3 years, and the formal institutional responses to these. Now, not every institution has formal responses, but ideally in a good, strong quality assurance process, they would. The external examiners have more contact with the processes and functioning of the programme. Not everything they say I would always agree with. Sometimes external examiners have their own pet issues that they pursue. And sometimes there's a change in external examiners, so you don't always get continuity. But nonetheless, it can be illuminating, and it can very strongly guide your examination of the evidence. So do have a look at what the external examiners have been saying. Again, with many different institutions around the country and many different approaches to education, you'll find that it's really important to have a clear understanding of the programme you're looking at and the context within which it exists. So all the entrances to and exits from the programme, all the pathways through the programme, and related programmes that are not visible or that you're not looking at from the accreditation perspective. And so Sligo IT have kindly allowed me to use this graphic that they gave us on one of our recent visits. Now, we were actually looking at the accreditation of the rectangular blue part in the middle, but you can see that there are different stages, there are different entry points, there are parallel entrance through online learning, there are parallel programs that we're not looking at, there are follow-on programs, and there are joint international cooperations. Now, if your program is anyway complicated at all in terms of its entry points and the pathways through it, do make sure that you have this picture. It will really help you to understand what you're looking at and to know what textual descriptions in the self-assessment report refer to. So, one of the first things I find useful to do is to look at the entry standard, the transfer, and the mobility requirements, because you need to figure out, are the programme outcomes actually achievable from the entry standards? And what efforts do the programme team make to ensure that the programme outcomes are achieved from those entry standards? So while Engineers Ireland is not now emphasising particular entry standards in every case, the outcomes have to be achievable realistically, and you have to make sure that the standards are being maintained in that process. You're looking to see, are there different cohorts of students coming in with different entry standards? And could, for example, weaker cohorts dominate the standard being delivered to the class as a whole? Are there undisclosed cohorts present for 1 to 4 semesters? Now, people don't intentionally hide cohorts of students, but there may be visiting students in various joint operations that they feel that a programme team might feel that they don't need to describe to us. I think they really should in most cases, because they can have either a beneficial or a lowering effect to the standard of the presentation to the overall class. So watch out for that. And you may find them coming in for some modules and not for others. So again, watch out for that. Obviously, jointly taught remote cohorts who might receive the same award are really important. And if they're receiving the same award and they're looking for accreditation, well then that's something that almost certainly will need a separate in-depth investigation and maybe even visits or certainly work with the joint institution. So if you see that happening, certainly bring it to the attention of the Registrar's office. And I've just taken a quote there from the procedures manual, and just the fact that it says that all alternative entry points and requirements and all exchange and transfer opportunities must be described. So you want to see the overall picture within which the program is operating. Now, in terms of and again, I just maybe note the fact that all of these slides at the moment are entitled before the visit. So all panel members before the visit. So you're all individually as panel members working at these things and thinking about them. It's a reasonable expectation that from the self-assessment report, you would have a description of the program duration and structure in terms of years, stages, semesters, modules, credits. And believe me, you don't always get that. So you sometimes do have to go back and look for it. And if there's more than one structure, you should have a description of each. You obviously should have a table listing all modules. And again, I've seen situations where sometimes people either give you a very brief table that doesn't have the information you need, or sometimes they've gone too far and it's spread over multiple pages and it's very hard to access. So a simple, usually one-page table listing all modules and key details about the modules with full transparency on options and electives. On a single page, because you'll be constantly referring to this, you'll use it as an index into the evidence itself. So make sure you get that and ask for it if you don't. It should have details of the allocation of marks and grades to examinations, continuous assessment, practical activities, and so on. So you should be able to see how all of the different evidence sort of comes together in terms of meeting the program outcomes from that table. So it will be an important table, and it's not the heat map, that's a separate thing. It essentially describes the technical aspects of the program, this table listing all modules. So if it's too complicated, ask for a simple version. If there's an old program structure looking backwards and a new one looking forwards, ask for both. Sometimes the people who are developing the program are not necessarily the people who are preparing for accreditation. And so you might find that you do need two different versions. Watch out for the situation where institutional rules might invalidate assumptions about the achievement of program outcomes. So that might be compensation rules or grade point averages that don't ensure that program outcomes are met. So, we've seen various situations like this over the years, and we're used to trying to understand them and incorporate them, but just make sure that there isn't something that you're missing on that. It's also reasonable to expect that you get tables showing student progression, both the first attempt and the resit for all stages of the program. And ideally, you would actually be able to follow individually named students through the program from year to year. Now, I see a question in the question and answer there about GDPR, and we'll address that later. But subject to GDPR requirements, you should be able to see student progression, and you should know how successful the program is in bringing students through. And then when you look at an exam paper, how many of the students actually were able to pass that exam paper, or what grades did they get? And that progression should be broken down into levels so that you can see the grade levels. I think both presenters previously mentioned the heat map. It's really useful to give an indication of the contribution of individual modules to program outcomes. If it doesn't follow the official description given here, ask for one that does. Yeah, you'll have time to do that if everything has been delivered the 6 weeks beforehand that's required. And I'd ask you to note there that the level in the heat map should be 0 unless at least some assessment relates to the program outcomes. If all that happens is that a topic is met in the lectures, but it's not assessed, that's a 0. And watch out for that, because people will make all sorts of claims. If they feel it's been covered, so why isn't it included as a program outcome? But that may be due to a misunderstanding of the concept of program outcome. So just note that. Now, if you don't have an electronic version of it, or if the rows and columns aren't summed numerically, well, then ask for one, because it's not the be all and end all, but it can give a useful indication of where you might want to look in more detail. Naturally, one would expect that some program outcomes are not as heavily represented as others, and that's fine. But if one that isn't normally represented heavily is still even lighter than you expected, well then, you might look a bit more deeply there to understand why. So flag rows and columns that are unexpectedly high or unexpectedly low. Remember that not everybody who contributes to this table will be a person who's intimately involved and understands the accreditation process. So as I think Damien said, it's not appropriate that there be entire rows that are all high values or all low values, and I've seen both. So watch out for that. You may even need to educate people during some part of the visit about that process, because, as I say, some people just look at it and think, well, let's get this off my desk and just fill in anything. And so, there's mixed quality in that table, but it's useful to have, and it is something that you'll find a good source of guidance for the evidence. So still before the visit note, at this point, at the very least, you should now have a pre-visit meeting of the panel, discuss between each other what you've seen in the documentation, decide if there are any gaps that need to be filled, and agree and allocate duties across possibly the programme outcomes, but see Appendix 2 on the assessor tips for other ways of doing it. So you're still several weeks, a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks at least before the visit, you should be having this meeting, and you should have time then to go back in. And notice I haven't said anything yet about examining the programme outcomes themselves. This is all preparatory work for looking at the programme outcomes. Until the work has been allocated, you can't really dig into the programme outcomes because there's too much information there. And this first step, I'm not too worried about, because the interactions are usually by email, and it's usually everybody is CC'd on the panel. But at least the chair of the panel should know that it is their duty to pull this together, and that they should make sure that there's a clear flow of information with the registrar's office. The second one is more important. It's the registrar's office that communicates with the institution, unless at some point that's handed off. So the panel member shouldn't be directly interacting with the institution, at least in the initial stages of organisation before the visit. And this was mentioned earlier, but it's really important. Decide at this point if there are sufficient issues with the documentation or evidence that the visit might or should be postponed. It's really hard to do that when you're on site. Everybody has travelled, and then an issue arises, and you're not ready to deal with it with the documentation that's there. It has happened, and it's a call that may need to be made, but it's better to avoid it if you can at all. And now, finally, I'm at the visit. Absolutely important that you clear your desk and your diary for that day, or whatever amount of time it is. This will need your full attention. There's no question about that. And if you've got to break off for calls or so on, try to keep them to an absolute minimum. So the visit won't be a walk in the park. It's quite intense, but it will be interesting, it will be rewarding, and it definitely is worthwhile doing. I found that I've gotten a lot of information, a lot of insight into teaching and approaches to program structure and program organization from the visits that I've made. And so it has never been something that I've considered as a load. I mentioned here, have a policy of absolutely complete and clear disclosure of gaps observed in the evidence with the program team. Be upfront with issues that you're grappling with, explain clearly what you're looking for, give them time to gather evidence. If you're not seeing what you want, be polite but firm, and particularly if you come up against obstructions. The program outcome descriptions are your touchstone. You keep going back to those, and all program outcomes must be achieved by all students that are being accredited. So watch out for that. Remember, it's not our job to tell people how to do their roles. So we don't stipulate how problems should be solved, but program teams generally appreciate getting examples of possible solution pathways. So be prepared to give the advantage or share your experience in a collegiate way. So, and praise good practice when you see it, and give credit when you ultimately and may often copy that good practice that you've seen. Also, I've even noticed that sometimes you'll see good practice in the institution, but not everybody on the program team is aware of it. And, you know, be cautious about doing this because you may be treading on toes, but it can be useful to reflect back to the program team some of their own good practice and point it out. It might be no harm to talk to a head of school if you have an opportunity before doing that. Don't make up your own standards. We work to the accreditation criteria documents in terms of program outcomes, program areas, and program management. Use those standards, keep them appropriate to the grade being applied for, no higher and no lower. Remember that every word in the program outcomes in particular has been mulled over and is there for a reason. Our job as program assessors is to bring our professional experience and our discipline-specific knowledge to the determination of the application to the program in question. So that's our role, not to set the standard, but to interpret the standard in the light of our experience and particularly our discipline-specific knowledge. If in doubt, obviously talk to the registrar's office and they'll give you examples of how things have been treated in other cases. Keep to the timetable, that's already been mentioned, and some of the other things I'll mention later. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. This third point, be wary of being invited by the program team to find gaps that would give them leverage for resources. That can happen and it can be appropriate, but make sure that such recommendations are fully justified if you decide to take that on board. When you're doing that visit to the facilities, observe the organisation and tidiness of labs, computer and project areas and technical staff work areas. Observe the types, levels, maintenance and observation of health and safety signage and procedures. I've seen in some cases that's really strong, in other cases not so much. By staff and students alike. Remember, good practice can't be instructed, it must be modelled. And finally, I would say, read the Accreditation Procedure Appendix 2 on Assessor Tips. There's lots of good advice there. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to jump straight into it here. And I've highlighted some bits of this. I won't be making the highlighted version available, but just to show you that there are parts of this assessor tips that are relevant. Remember, it's a peer review process. It's not adversarial. Always be open, allow the program team time to find the evidence. Remember also, this is a 5-year future judgment based on past year's evidence. And so you're also looking at the capabilities of the program management team in order to maintain quality through the future years of when you won't be there looking at what they're doing. All program outcomes must be achieved. I've said that. Watch out for choices of modules that can undermine the achievement. I've already mentioned about getting information, sharing concerns. Richard mentioned a collaborative document. That works really well. Use it actively and jointly during the visit, particularly, and after the visit. It allows each of the panel members to go in independently in their own time, complete the report, see what's been completed, and then the chair to make sure that everything is done. I would remind people, engineers are not always brilliant at the quality of their writing. This is a professional document, maybe visible certainly to the institution and within Engineers Ireland, but maybe even in more broadly in the future. So make sure that you write clearly and well. Also, just I mentioned there the evidence, the interviews for filling gaps. Be careful about the interviews. They can be very useful, but the interviewees may not be representative and may even not be relevant to the program that you're looking at. Talk to them nonetheless, but just keep that caveat in mind. Engineers Ireland have a list of possible interview questions here for the students, the graduates and the employers. They're very useful. They help you to keep on track with that process. You might have your own particular questions in particular cases, but they will be a good guide. Okay, and yes, you do need to get the write-up done within 2 weeks. I would say within 4 or 5 days while it's really fresh in your memory. Get it out of your head, get it written up. You can all work in parallel and you can see what each other are doing and maybe help each other along. There's a mention here of information at the correct level, and my interpretation of that is at the level in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. So that's a very useful way of thinking about the evidence and whether it's at the appropriate type of demonstration of knowledge and skill according to Bloom's or similar taxonomy. Okay, so look, they're the main points that I wanted to make, and thank you very much to Engineers Ireland for giving me the time to do that, and we'll do our best to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Noel.
Thank you, Noel, and thank you to all attendees for giving your time not only to this webinar, but to our accreditation process. Of course, it wouldn't be possible without this engagement from both our assessors and the HEIs. So if you are interested in volunteering as an accreditation assessor, or if you'd like to submit your program for accreditation, you can email us at Engineers Ireland, accreditation@engineersireland.ie.